Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host, Kerrigan.
Well, thank you very much. This is Witch Talk. Welcome, everyone, to Witch Talk. And today we're going to talk about alchemy. And we have an expert with us that wrote a fantastic book. We're going to talk about the book itself and his experiences and mastery on this fantastic discipline. And very, very complicated. So I hope you enjoyed it, and you're going to be able to do some questions or to write some questions on the chat room if you want to, and then we will go from there. So let me introduce you to our guest. Here we go. Mark Stavish has published over 100 articles, book reviews, and interviews on the traditions of Western esotericism. In 1998, Stavish founded what became the Institute of Hermetic Studies. In 2001, he established the Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin Fund, a non-profit fund dedicated to advancing the study and practice of Western esotericism. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my guest today on Witch Talk, Mark Stavish. Hello, Mark. How are you? Welcome to Witch Talk.
Oh, hello. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much for accepting the invitation. It's a pleasure to have you here and an honor. Now, I'm very curious about how did you become interested in alchemy? Because it's really not something that you find a lot of people, at least people that I know. Very few are involved in alchemy. How did you get interested in it?
Oh, it was very simple. I was involved with Rosicrucianism for quite a few years. My great-uncle had been a member and was a member of the Rosicrucian Order Amorc back into the early 20s. He was a member of various other esoteric groups as well, and his family that came over from what was then German-speaking Silesia had their own esoteric practices and occult practices that they brought over, and so this was really nothing new to me. And then as I became more involved in Rosicrucian and Hermetic thought and study, of course, alchemy pops up.
Yes.
And at this time, lo and behold, the Alchemist Handbook comes into my possession. I see that there's Frater Albertus in Salt Lake City, Utah. I write to him, trying to find out more information about what's going on there, and I get this letter back saying, "We're sorry, Frater Albertus is no longer here. He has died. We've been kind of meandering along for a little while, but we'll let you know when things get reorganized." And I think that was probably around 1983, and the letter is probably filed away somewhere. Well, then, of course, about 2, maybe 3 years later, I find out that the Rosicrucian Order Amorc in San Jose, California, was going to be having several classes on alchemy. And in fact, they had classes on them previously. Actually, they had them in the 1940s, and Albertus had attended them. And I write a little bit about that in the preface to my book.
Yes.
But then what I did is I signed up for those classes. Lo and behold, I find out just in time, before I even get my ticket, that the teachers who were supposed to teach weren't going to be teaching them. So, that comes and goes. A few years go by, I hear about, I'm reading Gnosis magazine, and I see this ad in the back for LPN, PON, or Philosophers of Nature. I write to them in Boulder, Colorado. I get some information about a conference in San Francisco. I don't really know who this guy is. I kind of pass on it. I get another notice later on, I think that's probably around 1991, for a conference outside of Chicago. And who's teaching it but Russ House and Jack Glass, the very people who had taught or were supposed to be teaching Amwork's class that I wasn't able to attend.
Wow.
So I know who these guys are. I'm going to go to this. Well, Jack Glass, who, of course, I've just posted some photographs of these guys just about an hour or two ago on Facebook. And it turns out, he was the only person to go through Albertus's class, 7-year class, twice. Okay?
Wow.
And Russ House had attended, Paracelsus Research Society, Paracelsus College, as they changed the name to. And again, I said, okay, this is great. Well, it just so happens that, I was going to see them for the week-long instruction. There's this French guy there named Jean Dubuis. I didn't know who he was. Okay? But I still remember when he got up to speak. He spoke about Qabala and alchemy. I didn't understand what he was saying about alchemy, but I knew one thing. He knew what he was talking about, or at least he appeared to, because he spoke clearly and precisely. And the same was true when he spoke about Qabala. It wasn't this kind of talk where you hear people using all sorts of Hebrew words and you have no idea what they're saying, but they make it sound like they do. He spoke clearly and precisely. So that's how I got started in alchemy. It took a while. I would say that was probably maybe, 8 years maybe? 9 years?
Yeah.
Okay? But from the initial impulse to finally getting to a class and then going off, that's how it happened.
Wow. Now, I've heard from you that you have quite a radical view on alchemy. Can you tell us what is that about?
Well, it's my belief that, when we go into an esoteric practice, modern esotericism is basically a lie. And since people grow up in the lie and they tell each other the lie, they don't even know they're lying to one another. And the only way you can understand that is when you step out of it and you look at what is classical esotericism. What were the classical schools like? What was their purpose and function? And let's compare their writings to, say, the modern writings. It's very different. For example, I always tell a student, any esoteric practice that isn't preparing you for death is doing you a disservice. Now think about that. How many of your occult practices or spiritual practices had anything to do with really preparing you for what it's going to be like when and after you die?
Yeah.
I bet none.
Yeah.
Well, none. That means they're of no value to you when you get right down to it. The classical schools, that's what classical initiation is about. The other thing is, we ask Albertus's question, where's the proof, or what are the results? This is simply karma, cause and result. Karma is nothing fancy. It's not, it's not what you're told it is. It's not some sense of cosmic justice. It's cause and result. If this, then that, and then that, and then that, and then that, until the wave, just stops going anywhere. So we have to say, if we do this, what will the results be? And in a classical school, you would see, or you would expect to see, a demonstration of the methodologies involved and their outcome. Because if you don't know what the outcome is going to look like, how are you going to know if you got it?
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So if someone's telling you, and if you go to a traditional, and by the way, this idea is still held in traditional Tibetan Buddhist schools. So there are these 4 aspects of the path, and one of them is that you have to know what the result is going to be of the practice. Otherwise, why are you doing it?
Yeah.
Okay. With that goes the question of, if someone's telling you that they know how to make the philosopher's stone, well, that's fine. That's what you're there to learn. But they need to be able to show you. And maybe they can't show you an actual transmutation of something into gold, but can they show you a transmutation into silver? Maybe they can't do that either, but can they at least show you something that goes beyond the normal realm, that lets you know that an actual transmutation is taking place through this process? Which also then sets into motion another question. What are these people like as human beings? Because if they're not decent human beings, if you wouldn't trust them with your cat, your children, or your houseplants, why are you trusting them with your soul? Because when you undertake an esoteric practice, that is what you're doing. It's not just your life, which you can't get back, and your money, which you probably won't get back, but it's your soul.
Yeah.
You can't get those back. So what do you know, this is what you're trusting the person with. So you need to know that they're a decent human being. And not only just a decent human being, but one that is not pleasantly deluding themselves either, but actually can teach you the very things that you're there to learn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you have to be very, very discriminatory and discriminating in your search. You can't be so eager and so desirous of a teacher or the path that you become gullible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is important now more than ever. More than ever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, what is alchemy, and where is it coming? Where does it come from? I've heard many versions of this, and but I just wanted to ask you and see.
The general idea is that alchemy is rooted in Egypt.
Yes.
Okay, and that the word is either Egyptian or Arabic, and refers to Egypt as in some fashion. Okay, and that this alchemy is, we say a divine chemistry is one of the more incredibly loose interpretations, and I think I use that one, or divine chemistry referring to the land of Black Egypt. Okay,
mm-hmm.
and that transmutation takes place. Now, what that means is we change one thing into something else.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens is that traditional alchemy was very much concerned with the relationship of consciousness, energy, and matter. Mm-hmm. These three form its sacred triangle, if you will. In comparison, astrology would be concerned with cycles and consciousness and energy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than matter as much. It's more concerned with the cycle. And Qabala is concerned with symbols and consciousness and energy. Less so matter, although it's always there. But the main focus of alchemy is matter. How do energy and matter and consciousness interrelate into one another and affect one another? How does this go back and forth?
Mm-hmm.
And what we've done with it is there's folks who take looking at alchemy as kind of a hyperchemistry or a para. There's kind of like a para-alchemy that came about in the late 19th, early 20th century, and they kind of look at it that. It's kind of a hybrid. It's not really alchemy. It's not really chemistry. But there's folks who kind of look at it just as a chemistry, a chemical equation. And there may be some truth to that, by the way. I'm not going. Nature is constantly making the philosophical stone. That's what's ignored by many alchemists. But since nature is constantly making this process, then there's an aspect that goes into this that may not have anything to do with quite with what we think of as consciousness. But the point is that it deals with what is the relationship. So as a person dealing with matter, and I'm dealing with its energetic qualities, and what is the effect it has on me, and what is the effect I have on it.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think in to put it in very poor terms, we're kind of trying to find that quantum Newtonian bridge.
Yes.
Where all of this kind of begins to make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now that being said, and this is very important, alchemy involves a speeding up of things, so that laws of nature are undertaken that are not understood generally by physics, and a genuine transmutation takes place. And this is where I get in a little trouble too, is, alchemy, to be real alchemy, has to involve laboratory work. It's not just psychological. On the other hand, laboratory work without any inner work is going to be just chemistry. So you have to have this process of both of them. And alchemy is also known as the royal art. So it was really one of the last things you studied in an esoteric discipline, rather than one of the first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, why do you think that people study alchemy today?
For the same reason they study anything: power.
That's it.
No one comes to an esoteric path with pure hands or pure heart.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's more so now than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody.
I think so too. But yeah.
Okay. And what happens is, as you undertake the process, you begin to realize that what your original aims and goals were, and you begin to modify them, or they get modified for you. They get modified out of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So part of it is our becoming, our long multi-incarnational, multi-cycle process of purification, you know, and growing up, you know, education and growing up. So we move from being just say, you know, life is hard, it's dirty, it's brutal, and it's short, and I want to find a way to make it a little more bearable. So I'm going to invoke some angel or demon, or at least try to. To, you know, how can I become a better person? To how can I become a better person and maybe help others? You know, it's a long process.
Now,
and many people come to it, just so you know. I mean, I know many people come to it because they're trying to find medicine. They want to help friends, or they want to help relatives, or people who are sick or ill. I mean, these are altruistic, or, you know, I don't say altruistic. They're less selfish than they appear.
Yes.
You know, but still there's a selfishness there too. So whatever happens, suffering, essentially this, suffering brings us to the occult path.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And we want to end that suffering.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you do have this book. It's I have to thank Llewellyn that sent me this amazing copy of your book. It's called The Path of Alchemy, Energetic Healing and the World of Natural Magic. Now, there is something that it's called the Great Work, or Magnum Opus, and there are various stages to this great work. What do they represent, and what is this great work?
Well, you know, as you know, Elixirs Levi stated, you know, the great work is nothing more than the man maturing to his full faculties and capacity. And that's really what it is. And the direct interaction with matter is what allows that to happen, because matter gives us two things. It gives us stability, which we don't have in the astral domains or the world after death. We don't have that, so unless we acquire it now. If we don't acquire it now, then we're not going to have it then. And that's what I talk about at length in Between the Gates, but another book. And so, but it also offers us, besides that stability, is resistance. Because it's stable, it doesn't change easily. So it forces us to move out of the idealistic domain of the mind and into reality. It's a mirror of what's really happening. And I mean, you can see this in the people around you. And, you know, here I'll get into some trouble, you know. You know, you see this with artists, and having been one, a social worker and psychologists and therapists all the time, and teachers, or anyone who lives in their head, or whether it be computer programmers or engineers. You know, engineers less so because they have to make it work. But, you know, it's the ideal world. They live in this world of archetypes. And then they get really upset when the physical world tells them something otherwise. And then they say the world's wrong. Well, alchemy says, no, cupcake. That's not right. The world is always right. It's you that have to change. And that's a powerful and difficult lesson. And, I mean, a perfect example is, I mean, people talk about nature, and nature is natural magic, the energies of nature. You know, nature simply is, okay? It loves all beings equally, which means it loves you just as much as it loves the ants and the worms that are going to eat you, because you're so stupid when you got in your car and went driving that day that you didn't really check your gas tank and didn't have a map and didn't have any food or a flashlight, and you got lost out in the state park and died. All that's loved equally by nature, and that's another harsh lesson that, you know, people don't understand. So, you know, it's when you get into dealing with nature, it's not always as warm and fuzzy as we'd like it to be, and alchemy makes it very clear. Now, on the other hand, when anyone wrestles these truths from nature, such as alchemy requires, or certain forms of ceremonial magic as well, when they wrest this hard-won truth, there can be a profound compassion that opens up in them. Or that compassion is essential prior to the opening. But you realize very quickly that people are what they are, and you cannot do the work for anyone else. You can help them, you can direct them, you can guide them. Your listeners can hear what I have to say and just turn it off because they don't want to hear anymore. Or they can maybe just listen and hope open up a little more and maybe go with it. But that's all we can do is guide them. We cannot do the work for them.
Yeah.
And that's what alchemy is all about. You must undertake the path and do the work for yourself because it is about your own becoming.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, what is the relationship between alchemy and the Qabala? And you talk about this extensively in your book, actually.
Yeah, that's really a fairly, I don't want to say modern, but really it's kind of but it is. It's fairly modern
a recent,
in terms of,
yeah.
in terms of history. In terms of history,
yeah,
not in terms of like the last 20 years or anything. Phenomena, and you see increasingly the two of them merge together, particularly from the Renaissance on. Again and again and again, because these, it's there earlier, but you really see this strong relationship develop, and by the 19th century and the 20th century, the two almost appear inseparable. But at the same time, the knowledge of practical alchemy is almost lost. It's very much on the decline. Now, alchemy, lessons, courses in alchemy were taught at, I believe it was Harvard. I think it was Harvard. It's in my book, might have been Yale, up until like 1820. Okay? But, of course, things change. Now, what happens is the symbolism of Qabala, the Tree of Life, the planetary symbolism associated with each of the spheres, these become, and the metals associated with them, these become mechanisms or tools for learning alchemy and making it more understandable. And, of course, this same Tree of Life diagram was adopted by various esoteric orders to symbolize its different grades of development. Okay? So the relationship is a little tricky. It depends on really whose methods you're dealing with, which school you're dealing with, or which path, because there's different alchemical paths. But essentially, it's how these symbols relate to one another, mostly on the planetary level. And the Tree of Life gives us this just wonderful diagram, or, as the unfortunate said, filing cabinet for ideas.
Yes.
So the alchemists just grabbed onto that. Like you see early, what was it? In the 19th century, you begin to see that, and it becomes full bloom with Levi, with tarot. Tarot had no relationship to any of that until he said it.
Until him, yeah, exactly. Now, let me just say that this book is, and I've read some books on alchemy, and some old books, some new books, and this is very. First of all, you're very clear, which is exactly what he said about that teacher that he went to see. That talk about you were concise and clear, and one of the good things that I like about this book is the conclusion, which you in the end of each chapter you kind of do a conclusion, a kind of summary of all of it. Then you break it down in key points, just in case, to really reinstate what really is important, and then you have assignments for people. So basically, I think that, in a very nice way, this is a course. This really is a course, an essential course on alchemy. And it's very nicely done. It's very nicely put it together. And the way you write it, it's very informative and helpful, because it really helps people reinstate and meditate on it. You have a couple of meditations that you do all through the book on various aspects and themes. It's really, really interesting and very, very good. I love it.
Well, thank you very much.
I really do.
The book was designed to be a user-friendly manual, because if it wasn't that, people wouldn't do it.
Yeah, no.
And essentially,
true.
we know that the unconscious, the key aspect of our being, which, or you saw it if you want to call it, or our lunar aspect, our subconscious, is something which does not easily take to new ideas. That's why learning things is difficult. So what we do is, to learn, we have to do what? We have to repeat. But we have to know what we're repeating. So we go over this. I tell you what I'm going to tell you. That's the first 3 key points, the overview. I tell you what I've just told you. That's the chapter. And then we go
Yes.
over it again, and those are the key points, so that the person actually has a chance to inculcate into themselves and imbibe into themselves the ideas present in each chapter. And of course, each person is going to learn a little differently. Some are going to head right into the lab work. Some are going to head in more to the meditative work. So a little bit is given along the way for everyone, so that they can, jump onto that train and find a place that they're comfortable with and can start their journey.
Yeah. Now, now we're going to go, in the book and kind of in the alchemy concept. There are three, what do you call it, three essentials in alchemy. What are they, and why are they essential?
The three essentials, yes.
Yes.
The sulfur, salt, and mercury of alchemy.
Yes.
Because without these, nothing exists. Now, it's interesting because in a lot of the early alchemical manuscripts, there's only two of them. But I think someone pointed out that with Paracelsus, a lot more emphasis became put on salt, and so now it's three. Nice to see how things progress. And they represent the three qualities that exist in everything and everyone. So the sulfur is what we would call consciousness, the unique aspect of it. And the mercury is the life force, or the energy. And the salt is the body, or the physical matrix and structure. And if you look at everything has that. Now, if you're a pure materialist, you're just going to look at the salt and maybe the mercury, because you'll see the mercury is really just an aspect of salt. It's a physical phenomenon, measurable but physical.
Yes.
If you're going to be heavily psychologically oriented, you're just going to spend a lot of time on the sulfur, which is the unique aspects, and the mercury. But that doesn't do you any good. We got to have all three of them. And when we have all three of them, we have something in this world. We have creation. Amorc used to call it the law of the triangle, the law of the Trinity. The older Rosicrucians had different books where they would show you these diagrams of endless triangles, and pages after pages with different words around them, showing what they mean. And the combination of these, what we do is we take them apart. That's solve. And then we bring them back together again. That's coagula. Solve, coagula. Taking it apart, bringing it together. And in this process of taking it apart and bringing it together, we get to purify it. That is, get rid of psychologically, we think of the obscurations, but in the mineral, we would think of the scoria that occurs. Like if you bring a mineral out of the earth, it's not pure, it needs to be refined. There's always some other stuff in there. So that's what we're doing. We're pulling it apart, purifying it, putting it back together. And each time we do this, as we go through this process, in theory, it gets stronger. Not unlike when you exercise. You exercise, you break the muscle down. You're not building it up, you're breaking it down. But it's in the rest period in between, when the muscle repairs itself, that it builds up and gets stronger. So it's very similar to that. Pulling it apart, putting it together. Pulling it apart.
Very good. Yeah.
Animals have it, plants have it,
and
minerals have it. That's an important point in alchemy. Everything in these are the three kingdoms. Animal, mineral, and vegetable. And all these kingdoms have sulfur, salt, and mercury.
Now, Mark, there is this. You just said this, and it's very difficult for me sometimes to pronounce these words because they're a little bit difficult for me for some reason. Spagyric, is that it? Spagyric, yes. Spagyric. What is a spagyric, and because it's an essential, part of alchemy, and it's a technical term. What is it really?
Oh, sure. Spagyrics, or sometimes I've heard it called spaggery, is what really Paracelsus is famous for, because he dealt so much with plants, and of course he did mineral work as well. But many people who do plant work are constantly referring to his writings. And spagyrics is taking the fundamental principles which I outlined for you and applying
Yes.
them to the plants.
Mhm.
Now, there are going to be those who argue that spagyrics is not true alchemy, that true alchemy is minerals only, and that you can't achieve a transmutation in the plant realm. I've heard that said. It's very nice. I also know for a fact that it's not true. And I say that because there are far too people in modern alchemy who do not have enough of a scientific background.
Mhm.
And even the well-intended ones who I know can accidentally lead you astray on this. So, let me give you an example. I was doing some plant work. I was calcining my salts, which means taking the plant matter and purifying it and drying it out and trying to get it as burning off the carbon to get it into as pure white salt or as white as you can. And I noticed as I was doing this that my salts were changing color. Now, you rarely hear people talk about this because they rarely get that. Okay? It's like when I made abramelon oil. You know, everyone who makes abramelon oil, it turns out to be this kind of, pea green mixture. Mine's always red. Because if you do it right, it's going to change. And the reason being is everything we see in alchemy wants to go to red. Red is the pure state, the pure energetic state. And which is interesting because in Tibetan medicine, Amitabha is the Lord of Infinite Light, and Amitayus is the Lord of Infinite Life. And they're both red. And Amitayus in the red color is the one which bestows, is one most commonly done for longevity practices and practices involving the body of light.
Mm-hmm.
So, in alchemy, we talk about the red stone, okay?
Yeah.
And everything moving towards red. So, if these salts, theoretically, will go from this gray color, or this black color to this gray color, and you work on them, and you work on them, and you get them to this white color, and they'll be pure white. And theoretically, you can push them further. I know Russ House mentioned to me that when he was in San Jose, California, at a class with Amworth, that they did have one fellow there who, in a very short period of time, had gotten his salts to a yellow and an orange. And they were very impressed. Very few people have done that. Now, I know when I was saying this earlier, when I was working on some salts, I was noticing this color change. And I was getting these light blues and light greens in there, and it showed up, when I magnified it. And I called a friend of mine. I said, geez, what do you think this is? And I told him what I was working with. And he said, well, it could be just copper concentrations. Well, he was giving me his best guess at the time.
Yeah.
And I said, no, I disagreed. I didn't think that was it, simply because I didn't think there's enough, copper salts or whatever would be in the plant to even get near that. But anyhow, I wrote it down as a possibility. And then I took a small sample. I called another friend of mine who is a physicist with a laboratory, and I called him, and he said, send me a sample. So I did. And a week later, he sends me back a complete readout of the contents. And he says there is no reason that any of these elements in there should give you that color. There's none. And I sent him the sample. I showed him the pictures. So there's no reason for this. Since what you have here is a genuine transmutation. Something is transforming or changing within it.
Wow.
So I know that transmutation takes place within the plant realm. I know this. I know other people who know it as well. So those who say it doesn't, again, you can argue this with me, but where's your proof? And in the end, show me your work. Where are you going with your work?
Yeah.
I don't want to sound that to be argumentative. It just so that we always constantly stay very practical about this, and not allow ourselves to argue about, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin kind of stuff. Because alchemy, Qabala, ritual magic, all of this can very quickly degenerate into that kind of scholastic argument.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Now, you talk also about the plant stone, and the question is, why is the plant stone the key to the astral world? And I think that the first question is, what is the plant stone, and then go from there.
Well, the
about
plant
the
stone
key.
is simply your work with a plant, that you've been able to create this product, if you will. It's a small stone or a pebble often. I've seen them soft, by the way. In fact, I had one that was soft. It was like licorice. And I was at Hans Nitzel. Hans Nitzel had studied with Albertus, and he was friends with Regardi as well. And he was part of Philosophers of Nature and when it was LPN and all that. And I was at his house when Stone came, and it was just like a piece of small licorice. Just sliced a small sliver off, and I tried it. It was quite fascinating. And still have my notes upstairs from what it was like. And then there's other stones which are solid. They're like a small pebble. And what you can do with it when you've made one is usually in the last stage of making, they kind of try and get a string in there or a thread or something for it to solidify around. And you can dip it into some distilled water, and the water will take on kind of a homeopathic tinct of the essence of the plant. And the stone won't dissolve, by the way. That's the point. The stone doesn't dissolve. Or you can put it in a glass of distilled water that has the same plant, fresh plant matter that is in it. So if you have a stone of basil, you theoretically could have basil in a glass and fill this with distilled water, and you'd put this in, and you would actually see it, is the essential oils get drawn out of the plants and to the surface of the water. And I still remember people telling me about when they saw this done by, who is he, the Australian alchemist who wrote a handbook. His name will come to me later.
It's okay.
Fellow. But they still say, wow, I remember when that happened. Okay, now here's a fellow, well-known, and almost all of his work was in the plant realm. He did some Indian alchemy as well, but it always was in relationship to plants. I never heard of it about being anything with minerals. And highly, highly respected. Highly sought after. So you have these, a variety of possibilities to us. And we just have to make sure that we're open to them and not very incredibly dogmatic and just close them down before we give it a chance. And particularly for people who are new to alchemy. Now, why is it the key to the astral? Well, very simply because the astral is a watery domain, using the language of the elements and of Qabala. And that means it's very fluidic. It moves very quickly. So as we begin to purify and get a better handle on these energies of the plant, we're working on the energies of our psychic centers, and it can open up a glimpse of these worlds. I mean, these plant products, even a tincture, not even a full stone, but just a tincture, can have some really fantastic effects on opening up the psychic centers.
That's incredible.
I mean, I remember having a drop of, I remember just like it happened yesterday. I opened up a package. A fellow had sent me a wonderful selection of horsetail. Pulled it out of his backyard. I made a horsetail tincture. And I remember just having a dropper, and a drop fell on my table. I just wiped it up with my pinky. I put it under my tongue, and I could just feel the whole poof, like the psychic centers associated with Saturn just go poof. So you'll have that, and so it's very good for that. And you don't get negative side effects. That's the other advantage. People constantly trying to find vegetable ways of getting into the inner domains, and that's why you have so much substance abuse.
Yeah,
and those bring terrible negative side effects. This doesn't.
Now, I'm very curious about this. How are the lunar cycles related to alchemy?
Oh, very much so, because the lunar cycles had to deal with plant growth and maturation.
Yes.
So you like to do things according to the lunar cycles.
Now, what is an elixir, and why are they important? And how can we use them? This is one of those words that it's very fantasized. Everything. Even in movies, you have these elixirs, and I can just think about one, which is Death Becomes Her. That little elixir on that flask that defies gravity, in this little pointy base. And so it's really, a word that it's really kind of surrounded with this myth of being something very special. What is it really, and why is it important, and how can we use it in alchemy?
Yeah, well, an elixir can be one of two things. It can be simply a alchemical product in liquid form of a single plant, or it can be a combination of plants. So what will happen is when many people are early in the process of learning spagyric work, they make their tincture, same as making an herbal tincture of any kind. The difference being, of course, is that when you're making an herbal tincture, you then drain off the fluid, and you throw in herbal tinctures, you throw the plant away. In an alchemical tincture or plant or stone, you take that and you burn it, you calcine it and purify it, and you take those salts and you recombine them with the mercury and the sulfur. The sulfur being the essential oils, of the plant, the characteristic of it, and the mercury, which is the alcohol, really. Okay. Now, the the tincture is the mercury and the sulfur. Now, you could take that just as it is. But it'll be probably a little weak, but you could take it. You could take the salts, as we talk about in the book, calcine them, and add those back in. And many products are available on the market like that. Okay? And let me tell your listeners, here's a word of advice to your listeners. If you're looking at a spagyric product, and it says, the salts have been re-added, and you can hold that bottle up to the light and see the salts suspended in there, they're not pure enough. Okay?
Yeah.
They should essentially dissolve in there.
Yes, yeah.
Now, I'm sure there might be cases where there might be little specks or something, but you shouldn't see stuff floating in there.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
There's a little word for you.
Yes.
So,
well, thank you.
Buyer beware.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
When you do this, you'll find that the salt adds a fixing quality or fixing power to the tincture that not having it doesn't. And it's that fixing power that helps to clean out the psychic scoria or residue or obscurations in the psychic physical matrix. So the salts are very important. That's why you work so much on the salt. The secret's in there. You got to purify the salt so that everything can move freely.
Now, you do talk in your book about experiments with water, which I thought that it was very interesting. Not only because it's connected with the lunar kind of aspect of it, but it's very interesting. And why is it relevant, and where can we use it? It's a very short part of the book, but it's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I want to have some extra things in there for folks who maybe want to do something that is somewhat alchemical, at least energetic, where they can verify some things for themselves. But maybe they're not particularly want to work with alcohol. And now, working with alcohol is more of a psychological problem than it is an actual physical one. And I was a substance abuse therapist for many years, okay? So I have an idea what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
In the sense that when we're talking about someone who has abused alcohol in the past, or drugs and alcohol, and now they're taking a tincture, if they're putting that tincture in hot water, most of that alcohol will evaporate. Okay, and in fact, when you're making a stone, the alcohol evaporates. And when you have a stone, the only thing you have is the salt, which is the physical product, and the essential oil, or the sulfur.
Yeah.
Because the temperature in the crucible causes the alcohol to evaporate. Okay. So that said, okay, I wanted to have something in there for folks who maybe were a little didn't want to do so much with alcohol. At least something. And also energizing water. That's a fabulous old school practice that is has great effects on expanding the aura that are so underutilized by so many folks that I thought I'd mention it. And also
absolutely.
I'd say charging water through writing. People make a big deal out of this Japanese fellow who
yes,
did that
Dr.
research.
What is it? Dr. what? Emoto.
Well, if you look at the old alchemical, if you look at the old magical text, I mean, again, I came from a background that was rooted in German Renaissance and medieval magic. That was common. You'd write something on a piece of paper, the talisman, the prayer, whatever. You'd stick it in water and then have the person drink it. The old school ways of doing it. You see a lot of that. I was just reading in the appendices to the 6th and 7th books of Moses, which is the common magical text for that period.
Yes.
Write this psalm on water and stick it in.
Yeah.
The charging of water, particularly the way it's described in the Path of Alchemy, is something that you can have an immediate effect on. You immediately know it. You can see the difference. And there have been a lot of studies, particularly I mentioned one that happened at McGill University in Montreal, where they showed that people charging water, that the psychological state of the person affects the water and would affect plants. It would affect living organisms.
Absolutely. So be careful when you water your plants in a rage.
That's right.
Do not do it. All right. And my
Well,
plants
I
died.
make that joke
All
too,
of
but
them.
that's why going to a bar and grabbing a hold of your ice cold mug of beer with your stinking thinking is, a one-way trip. You're charging that drink as a sacred mixture of misery.
Absolutely.
And then you ingest it, and you wonder why your life continues to go down the toilet.
It's a
I
cycle.
don't know.
It's
I'll
a
spell it out
cycle.
for you, but you probably won't listen anyhow.
So, Mark, what is it? Ends, and how can we use it? This is something that you talk about in your book. ENS. Ends.
Yes, the ends. The ends is something that we really see Paracelsus writes the most about, and he gives. I think he talks about 4 different types
Of ends.
in his writing. The one which is mentioned in the Path of Alchemy is one that was very popular with the philosophers of nature, and it is a tincture which is incredibly high in the element of fire. And what that means is when we're dealing with the elements of earth, air, fire, water, and space as well, although we tend to think only of 4 of them, earth, air, fire, and water, but there's the space or the chaos or the abyss from which they come, the nothingness from which they come. We find that everything has those elements to it. We have earth, air, fire, and water. Plants do, animals do. It's just varying degrees and compositions. So what we as people on the esoteric path want is we want a lot of fire. That's why you see in all the old writings why fire is so important, because that brings warmth, heat, light, activity, consciousness, vitality, purification to the system. That's why you see from the earliest Siberian shamans to Egypt to alchemy to Qabala, the different yogas, fire is the thing. That's our tool of transformation.
Absolutely.
And an ends is a tincture that is very high in fire, and because each plant has a planetary quality to it, you can attune that fire quality to a particular planet or psychic center or psychic centers of that nature, if you will, and therefore provide a additional boost or initiatic impulse to your work. Because ultimately, alchemy and Qabala are not about angels and demons and winning the lottery and trying to do whatever you're trying to do, but it's about initiation, and that's unfoldment of consciousness. Now, with that unfoldment of consciousness will come an unfoldment of abilities. Unfortunately, what we have done with Western occultism is we have placed a great deal of emphasis on technical skills without understanding the pre-required attitude or consciousness that allows them to function properly.
Absolutely.
And that is because we have dismissed and disregarded the connection between religion and initiation.
Absolutely. I so agree with you. I couldn't put it better. And in so many contexts that happens, in so many disciplines. So I was just looking at the book, and I just found some diagrams. There's some diagrams about distillation, and the equipment that it's required to do a simple laboratory distillation train, and it's very clear. Very clear. No, complications at all. I mean, where can you buy this supplies? I mean, any chemical, store or...
Just go to Amazon.
Amazon, is that it? All right. Okay.
Yep.
And
of course, search around. I mean, I have a variety of sources that I like to use.
Yeah.
But it's best to just search around and find out where, different prices. There's different forums that you can go on to, like Yahoo groups has different alchemical forums. Rosa Mystica is a nice one, and there are others, and just there they have it. The list of talk to people. Where do you get your equipment from? What do you get? Where's some basic stuff, and find out, because I don't want to mention a supplier who either may be out of business because I haven't bought anything in a year or two, or there's been a change in quality. You know what I'm saying? So, but just go on there and look around, and if not, at the end of the day, just go to Amazon and compare.
And
look at what they're offering.
Yeah,
you don't need much. It's much easier now to get equipment than it was ever before.
Oh yeah,
and cheaper
I'm sure.
too.
I'm sure. Oh, I'm sure. Now,
just
the big question.
Don't buy used.
No. Oh, why is that? Well, I know why is that, but I just...
For.
Yes, that's what I...
That's all. Unless you're very skilled in chemistry.
Yeah.
And unless you're very skilled in it, and you don't know what it was used for, don't do it.
No. And you talk a little bit. I'm going to ask you about this. The intention. We don't know with intention. And that can be embedded into the equipment eventually. Okay. So the big question that we all are waiting for: what is the Philosopher's Stone?
So we say the Philosopher's Stone, again, depends on who you ask. Some are going to say that it is, a state of consciousness. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Others are going to say it is a physical product, that irrespective of consciousness. Again, I've met one or two folks who I think that might be true. I think they were onto something. But they weren't terribly nice people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, who knows how things work. My personal belief is that it's both.
Yeah.
That it is a state of awakening in which we understand our place in nature. We understand who we are, where we've come from, and where we're going. We're not there yet, but we understand where we're going and how we're going to get there.
Yeah.
And we understand the relationship between mind and energy and matter, and our relationship to others as well. And others doesn't just mean the people around you, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But it means all things. I do a little trick with folks when I do seminars. I like to use the Corpus Hermetica, and there's a paragraph in there which says, imagine yourself, and it talks about, before death and after death, above the skies, below the earth, young and old, and all these things, all at the same time. And all knowledge of all things, all this at the same time. And people do this, and they love it. And then I say, who else was there with you? And nobody has anyone else with them. But you see, essentially, the condition that so many of us are in is so narcissistic and selfish that we're only concerned about our own enlightenment.
Yeah, that's true.
No,
yeah.
just that. And when you undertake this path, you have to overcome your own limitations to come to your full capacity that the great work is about. And that means overcoming your narcissism and your selfishness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And therefore, as that says, Jesus says, they ask him, what should we do? He says, very simple. Love your neighbor as yourself, and the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul. The question is, when you get into these esoteric groups, you find that loving one another usually has a very limited connotation, or it's not there at all.
Yeah.
And we have to learn to develop healthy compassion, to be wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove. That's a wise compassion. And with that, as that grows, as our compassion grows, our connectivity grows. And as our connectivity to things grow, so does our ability to interrelate and interact with them grows. And as that grows, so does our ability to transform and transmute. So an open heart and an awake heart is what the Philosopher's Stone is. And what that results into is an ability to interact with matter on a level unconceivable. Mm-hmm. But not just matter, but with all things. So it's not just, it's all the realms. It's angels, archangels, and demons, and elementals, and animals, and ghosts. How often when you've said your prayers, have you said your prayers for anyone other than yourself? Or maybe you include a sick friend. But how often do you pray for the dead? How often do you often pray for those who actually suffer in hell? You don't even believe they exist anymore. And then how do you believe in heaven either? Or purgatory or any of these things? So when we pray, we have to pray for all beings in all different areas of life. Because, again, we came onto the path really to overcome our own suffering. And our goal then has to be to help relieve the suffering of others as well, in a wise way. Wisely, though, not foolishly. But we have to formulate that intention.
Now, you talk about good blood and bad blood in the book, and the importance of good blood and bad blood in alchemy. What is this? What is the importance of good blood and bad blood in alchemy?
It's essentially that not so much good and bad, but what happens is as we change, our body changes, and our life force changes, and our life force goes through our blood. So one is able to have kind of, if you will, a kind of primitive genetic test, if you will, of someone's awakening by looking at their blood. Again, this is old school stuff that is often ignored in modern schools.
Yeah. Now, Go ahead. Sorry.
I said, and it's scary too.
Because
you realize that as you change and your structure changes, that then has an effect on, of course, how you interrelate with others, but also then on your progeny. And that's what the whole notion of, the whole story of Holy Blood, Holy Grail.
Yes.
But you have to understand, that's really what we're talking about with us as individuals. And the, we'll say, the genetic future of the human race on a certain level in alchemy.
Now, there are two stones in alchemy that you talk about in a book. What are they and what they're for?
There are two stones? Oh, I know I talked about plant stones. We went over that. You mentioned the Philosopher's Stone.
Yes.
And we went over that. And the Philosopher's Stone has different levels. There's the white and the red.
Yes.
And the white has, when you're dealing with the Philosopher's Stone, and you're able to transmute things into silver or the lunar realm. Okay? And then, of course, red stone is the philosopher's stone proper that we think of, and that transmutes things into gold.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you read the story of the Flamel and the story of his path, you see that he made a transmutation into silver on such and such a date, and then later he made a transmutation into gold. So that's movement along the way. And if you notice, you talked about Qabala. Kabbalistically, what we're talking about is moving up the center column, up the middle pillar.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So we're saying that it's almost as if, many people talk about Tiferet, but, they don't really live there. They just occasionally visit. When we're talking about the Philosopher's Stone, we're talking about someone who lives there. And again, lives there how? Well, as a state of consciousness. And then what does that consciousness do? It affects their entire physical structure. They're solarized. And then what we do is on the energetic level, that's what we mean by the solar body, the body of light, and that's where immortality takes place because they don't lose consciousness when they die.
Now you talk about Saturn in your book, and you talk about the role of Saturn in alchemy. What is the role of Saturn in alchemy?
Saturn is the planet nobody likes.
Yes.
Because Saturn is the taskmaster. But Saturn, again, is limitation in form. And because it's limitation in form, and it sits so high on the tree, as we often call, depending on who you look at, what you're reading, Saturn is often attributed to a kind of queen of heaven, queen of earth, although we see Saturn as an old man, typically in astrology. So it deals with matter on the most fundamental level of earth, but it also deals with matter on the most subtle level of just opposition, of individuality, of that stopping force. Again, that opposition that we talk about, limitation. So Saturn is really a horrific planet to the baby boomer generation who thinks that limitations are so horrible, and now is running into the reality of them, as we all are.
Yeah.
The whole planet is coming into grips with the notion of limits.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Things have effects. What you do has an effect. And Saturn teaches us that, whether you like it or not. Again, nature doesn't care what you like. It's not about that.
Yeah.
Doesn't care that you're a nice person or a bad person. And I know this sounds silly, but think about how many people who just don't get that point.
Yeah, that there's no limits. Yeah. Now, what is the connection between alchemical symbolism and the tarot?
Well, I put that in there for folks who like tarot.
Yeah, I know.
And there really is. There's very little symbolism in the traditional sense. All of that connection comes from the late 19th century, from the French occult revival period. And Oswald Wirth was really brilliant. I mean, his book, if you can find a copy of it, I hope Weiser brings it back into print. It was originally the Tarot of the Middle Ages. They published it under the Tarot of the Magicians. If you get a copy, it's just fabulous to have. And its French tarot is really somewhat different than the Golden Dawn British schools that most folks are used to. And he gives a overview of the tarot in different paths, as a Hermetic instruction, as a Masonic instruction, and as an alchemical instruction. And he actually does a very nice job of it, by the way. And that's why I put it in there, because, again, it's a starting point for people. That's the way I thought it is. If this will help someone start and move inward on the journey, then it's a great place, because it was good.
Yes, yeah. Now, you do have a lot of other books, and we sometimes we don't have the time to talk about all of them, but you do have, and the other thing that I wanted to mention also, it's this website, the Institute.org, which you are connected with, and
Yes.
It's very, very interesting. You have one of the books that you have. Let me see if I can see here, because I'm kind of trying to trying to see where you have your books, because I can't really. Okay, so one of them is Qabala. Is this? I think that this is one of yours, right?
Qabala for Health and
Qabala
Wellness.
for Health and Wellness, yeah.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to mention some of them, because I really think that it's really, it's really important. What can you tell us a little bit about this book, just very briefly, so that we can just...
that was a lot of fun. Wanted to write a book about Qabala, and because so many of them are out there, we had to take a new angle.
Yeah.
And essentially, this is where marketing comes into play. The publisher and I talked about it. We said we needed to have a book on Qabala that 15-year-old ceremonial magician types were not going to buy, and that the wider audience was. And who's the wider audience? Well, for New Age material, it's fundamentally women between the ages of 25 and 45. So that was a book specifically designed at women, and designed for them. And health and wellness is a key aspect. And it really is a very good book. Llewellyn did let it go out of print in English, although it's in print in Portuguese and Russian and Spanish. And, a few other
that's
languages,
very
too.
good to hear. Portuguese? Oh. Brazilian Portuguese or Portuguese from Portugal?
Brazilian. Well, I don't know the difference between pronunciation.
Well,
in
it's
my
this.
mind,
Let me enlighten you.
I know there's a difference between how they pronounce, but I don't know if there's a difference between how they write.
Yes, they are.
So I know
There
it's,
is.
I know
There
it's
is.
it's published down in Brazil. In fact,
Yes.
3 of my books are in Brazil.
Well, that's great. That's great news. I'm Portuguese
and
originally. Yes, I'm Portuguese originally from Lisbon, not from Brazil. But I have a lot of friends in Brazil, and there is the difference. The difference is basically between British English and American English.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same difference. So Portuguese from Portugal will be the British English, and the Brazilian English will be the American English, which there is some differences in grammar and the way that you write words and you put them in sentences and expressions and idiomatic expressions, all of that. So all of the differences that come with it. So that's basically the difference, but I'm very happy that it's in Portuguese.
So we have 2 people separated by a common language.
Yes. So now you have another one, which is it's a very interesting book, which we don't really see very often. Books about this, which is the Freemasonry. Ritual symbols and Freemasonry. Sorry.
Yes.
See,
that's
my
in
Portuguese.
as
That's
well.
my Portuguese.
And,
Freemasonry, ritual symbols, and history of the secret society. Right.
That's
right.
just a great book. I mean,
Wow.
it really is. And I don't say that because I wrote it. It's just because when I wrote it and I was done, I said, wow, that was really a great book.
I do not. Yes.
Wow, this all came together so wonderfully. As I was writing it, everything came together so wonderfully. I got wonderful support from folks. And John Michael Greer gave me an article on sacred geometry for the appendix. Let's see, I think, did Duquette write the introduction? I don't know. I think he might have returned a favor on that and given me an introduction. Yes, he did. And of course, Jocelyn Godwin, who is an international authority on esotericism and Renaissance studies from Colgate. He gave a very thought out, jacket endorsement for it. So it was just one of those books that it was a joy to write. And it came together very, very wonderfully. And it covered all the aspects of Masonry that both Masons, particularly Anglo-Saxon Masons, need to know. But also, increasingly, Masons in other jurisdictions want to know and have an interest in. So that's why you see this nice progressive overview. Again, a nice study, where it began, where it's going, where it went to, the Grand Lodges, then boom, 30 years later, all these different appellant rights, and then the different esoteric aspects and how that continues up through and then influences the French and the British, primarily occult revivals, but the other ones as well. And then brings us to the present. Where are we going from here as Masons?
It's very interesting, and I think that it's an essential book. I don't really know a lot about Freemasonry. I do have some friends that are Freemasons from Europe, not from the American. So I don't really know anything about the American Freemasonry. So I think that it would be a great book to actually learn a little bit about it. Now the other thing is Between the Gates. Lucid dreams, lucid dreaming, and it's very interesting book. Why did you write this one?
Between the Gates was a probably, as some people had said to me, this is your masterpiece, and they meant that on several levels.
Yes,
because, again, as I said to you earlier, most modern esoteric disciplines do not prepare you for death, and therefore they are a lie. And what I looked at is all of the esoteric training that I had received. And again, there were certain thematic ideas that were presented there, but they were never put together cohesively into a structure. And I think the degree of the degeneration of esotericism in the West can be seen in the reviews in that book on Amazon. And I don't mean that like, I just don't like the people who don't like it because of the way they reviewed it. What I'm saying is they reviewed it and clearly had no idea what they were talking about. And they should. And I say they should because these are common ideas. I didn't make this stuff up. There is a connection of consciousness, a continuity of consciousness, and a relationship between our meditative states, our dream states, our lucid dreaming states, what we call out-of-body or astral projection states, and then the process of death, what we seek, which is the body of light or conscious immortality. This is clearly delineated in the traditional the classical texts of Hermeticism, and it's clearly talked about in the traditionalist schools in Europe. But for some reason, esotericism, again, maybe it's because of the Kali Yuga, who knows what it is, has degenerated in the West to such a point where this continuity of consciousness was not even understood. And when it was presented, many people said, they didn't even understand what I was talking about. But for those who might have studied or had some fortunate experiences in, say, again, any of the classical Buddhist schools, or particularly the Vajrayana schools and the Nyingma schools of Tibetan Buddhism, they would have said, well, of course. well, duh, yeah. But what I did is, without having to make reference or recourse to other traditions, I outlined for folks, because I was really surprised at just the lack of understanding of this. I outlined for them a complete overview of consciousness, what it is in Western esotericism, how it applies to alchemy, Qabala, and a little bit of Enochian in there as well for some folks. And fundamentally, how to wake up. So that how to wake up so that when you die, you're going to have some choices over what goes on. Because people don't, people have this belief that they reincarnate. I must have chosen. You didn't choose it. You didn't choose it any more than the choice you made to grab that Haagen-Dazs chocolate chip ice cream. What happened is you saw the Haagen-Dazs chocolate chip ice cream, and you reached out and grabbed it and said, this is good. There was no thought involved. That was all habituated conditioning. And that's how most people reincarnate. It is instinctual, it's habitual, it's unconscious. What we seek to do in our esoteric path, assuming it's initiatic, which means it's progressive and developmental, is to be able to become awake and to make choices. And that involves literally being awake. And that's where lucid dreaming comes in the out-of-body experience. And I say to people, how you are when you dream is how you are when you die. that is how it will be for you.
Yeah, yeah.
So you need now to start preparing your mind so that you can experience the process of not having the anchor of a body to hold on to. And that's what I said earlier. What does matter offer? Matter offers us stability.
Stability, yeah.
Right, and that's what happens. People, they seek out and grasp some kind of stability, and that is fundamentally what we call reincarnation, at least in this domain.
Now, you were interviewed by a very famous producer and director. It's actually, if I tell this, it's better for people to relate to it. Sherlock Holmes director movies.
And I just saw the second movie last night with my kids.
You did?
Yeah.
Did you like it?
He's
very good.
It's a great movie.
He's very good. I mean, he really is. For people that don't know who we are talking about, we're talking about Guy Ritchie. And for people who don't even know, that guy, well, it's the former husband of Madonna. So there you go. And he interviewed you in this. For an upcoming feature-length film or on esoteric wisdom and teachings. Do we know when this is coming up or not?
No idea. I have no idea. And it's one of those things that, in fact, I loaded on Facebook a few photographs earlier today from part of that, from some of the folks. I went over. I get this email, and it says, it's from Guy Ritchie, and at first I didn't recognize the name. I thought, well, my accountant's name is Ritchie. I don't know, maybe it's some relevant. So I open it up, and it says, director, producer Guy Ritchie wants to talk to you. I almost deleted it, I said, okay.
My.
So I read the proposal. I thought, well, that's neat. So I knew one or two people on the list, so I called him and said, yeah, it's for real. Okay.
Oh.
So he called me, and we talked for about an hour and a half, and it was very pleasant. And then he said, hey, you want to come to London? I said, yeah, sure. He goes, well, how about next week? I said, nah, how about next month? So we made arrangements, and after an incredibly long flight, I got over there for a very short trip. But, the day before, I was able to hit the British Museum, the United Grand Lodge of England for Freemasonry, and Atlantis Bookshop, all because of where they sit in that triangle.
That's
and it
great.
was funny because as I was in Atlantis Bookshops, UPS was dropping off a box that had copies of my book in it. So that was
wow. That was
pleasant.
That's what it's called, the co-incidence.
Yeah.
Truly.
I have to say that he was very pleasant.
Yeah.
Put me up in some nice digs, and was very well informed. And the questions which he asked, some of the side material that I saw out of camera range that he was reading, this was good stuff. I mean, he was someone, at least he was taking his research very seriously. And we spoke, I think, probably for 3 hours on camera. And that was that. I hopped the plane the next day and came home. But he was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed it a great deal.
I'm very glad that Guy Ritchie actually is informed. Because, most of these celebrity producers, directors, they're not at all involved in, they have people who do the research for them, they don't really, but, I think that the English are a little bit different on that aspect, I think, the English directors and producers, I don't know, but I think that it's really, I look forward to it. I mean, he will email you saying, oh, it's coming out, no?
I hope so. You never know.
Or his people.
I've had a
will
lot
email
of
you.
peculiar experiences with documentary producers that.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, they're
okay.
They're not exactly the best on saying please, thank you, or sending notifications.
Oh dear.
Hopefully he'll be different.
Oh, I'm sure he will.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you so much, Mark, to be on Witch Talk. It was a pleasure to talk to you and to have you on the show talking about your book, The Path of Alchemy, Energetic Healing and the World of Natural Magic. I really do recommend this book. It's absolutely fantastic. And I'm really pleased, and thank you so much again for being here and to share your wisdom with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Now, don't go anywhere. I'm going to just close the show, and then I will get back to you. Okay? Don't Don't
good.
hang up. All right? Okay, I'm just going to close the show. All right. So thank you very much, everyone in the chat room. Thank you for being here and for being on Witch Talk with us. I'm going to be back next week with more Witch Talk for you. Meanwhile, and during this fantastic week, hot in some places, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Bye-bye.